Women's History in the 1970s by Tristan Paul. Background of time period. The 1970s was a critical moment for equal rights due to various movements formed for equal rights. The civil rights movement opened the door for other voices to be heard, such as the voices of women. At times, as time was advancing, people got less and less tolerant of bigotry and were less willing to watch it go by uncontested. Women were also having more prominent roles in all forms of work, making their desire for equal rights stronger and more emboldened. Second wave of feminism. The second wave of feminism is the second major push for women's rights in the United States. The second wave lasted from the 1960s to the early 1980s, with much of this happening in the early 1970s. The first wave before it was from 1848 to 1920. The third wave after it was from the mid-1990s to the 2010s, being recent in comparison. However, there's disagreement on whether it ended in the 2000s or it ended at all. Second wave of feminism continued. The second wave of feminism stood out in comparison to the first wave. While the first wave focused primarily on voting rights for women, the second wave was able to branch out into other related human rights issues. These related issues include, but are not limited to, reproductive rights, rights for women of color, such as Black, Chicana, and Chinese women, queer women, and women in the workforce. World War II and the Civil Rights Movement were events that heavily impacted the era of the second wave. Prominent women in the second wave. Gloria Steinem founded the feminist magazine Miss and led various feminist movements such as the Women's Action Alliance. Betty Friedan published The Feminine Mystique, a book that helped spearhead the second wave. Margaret Sloan stood out for queer black women, edited for the Miss magazine, and was a part of the National Black Feminist Organization. Eleanor Holmes Norton was a member of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. She represented several women of Newsweek, a weekly news magazine, challenging its policy on only men being reporters, and won. Prominent women in the second wave continued. Barbara Smith co-founded the Combahee River Collective, a black feminist group, and co-authored the Combahee River Collective Statement, a book that actively challenged corporate powers and stood out in favor of black feminism. Dolores Huerta co-founded the United Farm Workers, helping Chicanos working as farmers. Si se puede, yes it can be done, slogan used by Chicanos to this day. Francisca Flores supported the Chicana organizers and made their voices heard in economic and social policy debates. How men perceived this movement. Unsurprisingly, and plenty of men were not happy that women who were historically were treated as lesser started to rise and speak out for their rights. Despite this, the feminists were undeterred as they continued to organize and protest even in the face of anti-feminist groups made to combat this. There are plenty of men who supported the secondary wave, however, including such powerful figures such as President John F. Kennedy, who helped by establishing the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, a group of women dedicated to fighting against discrimination in the workforce. Black women's rights. One of the most important groups in the second wave were black women, as they were some of the most active and outspoken. One of the issues black feminists brought up was that feminism was mostly for white women, as women of color were left out of protests and discussions about women's rights often. This led to the creation of the National Black Feminist Organization, a group dedicated to giving black women a bigger voice. Despite this, the NBFO was hit with criticism from smaller groups of black feminists, saying they were neglecting to address subsects of black women such as queer black women and working black women. Black women's rights continued. This continued critique spawned another large group of black feminists, the Combahee River Collective, named after the Combahee River Raid, a military act by Harriet Tubman in 1863, where she freed over 750 slaves alongside the Combahee River, South Carolina. This collective not only addressed the same issues as the NBFO, such as police brutality and segregation, but also the issues of queer women. They ended up disbanding in the late 1970s due to various reasons such as lack of support financially and in general. Chicana women's rights. Since the 1960s, Chicana, otherwise known as Mexican origin women, have been fighting for their rights. However, like the black community, they had their own struggles, especially when it came to infighting, as Chicano men were also fighting for their rights and considered the splinter faction to be diluting the cause. Chicana women also ended up doing most of the work when it came to gatherings, such as running the newspaper to spread the word and cooking for protesters. This only strengthened the tension between Chicano men and Chicana women. Chicano men also put a lot of cultural significance on traditional Chicano values. These values were rooted in misogyny, which stifled Chicano women as it put limits on their education, healthcare, and employment opportunities, causing many to rebel and form their own groups. Chicano women's rights continued. One of the most discussed issues for Chicano women were reproductive rights, particularly contraception. This is because traditional Chicano values were frowned upon most forms of contraception and actively encouraged young Chicano women to be mothers. This, combined with high fertility rates that Chicano women in the U.S. have, made this a hot button issue to discuss. Queer women's rights. Queer women, particularly lesbians, were also very outspoken at this time. In fact, lesbians are historically the most outspoken queer people overall. Despite getting support from activists such as Margaret Sloan and from organizations such as the Combahee River Collective, queerism was seen as a lesser problem overall. This discrimination has caused some groups of lesbians to see homosexuality as a symptom of a patriarchal society, and that without it, no such labels would be needed, which drove a wedge with other queer groups and contrasts greatly to the mindset of today. Women in the workforce. A desire for feminists was to have greater influence in mass media, as changing public perception of women could easily help their cause. As such, several women got jobs in news reporting despite the discrimination. Several of them also wrote, making money and off publishing and selling feminist books that spread their ideals all over the country. Women overall got paid lower than men, and a fair amount of women-only jobs such as children's workshop, a nursery, were subjected to poor working conditions. There was also a demand for more maternity leave provisions due to more women more actively working than ever before. Women and family structure. There was a societal desire to return to traditional family values as the US, alongside the rest of the world, were shaken by World War II and the mass loss of life. This caused men to put pressure on women to become stay-at-home mothers. Women rebelled against this as their desire to get jobs alongside becoming mothers instead of just becoming mothers. This damaged the idea of a traditional American nuclear family that was set in the 40s and 50s, to this day even. Women were also advocated for better education for their children, with women using their influence as teachers to spread this idea. Results of the second wave. In conclusion, the second wave of feminism was a massive success overall. Despite most of the organizations sprung up during this time have disbanded, their ideals still live on, such as the NBFO inspiring the National Black Alliance of Feminists and the National Alliance of Black Feminists, and some organizations such as the EEOC still existing to this day. Many women got into the workforce, getting better educations, and got laws and civil rights passed to benefit women, with presidents such as John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon working together with them. We still have a long way to go to this day, but it's thanks to feminists from the first, second, and third wave that women have achieved this much. Thank you.